So I guess now it's very late. The discipline is getting a bit more loose. But I want to thank the Danish organizing committee for organizing this wonderful conference and also for asking me to be the Danish keynote speaker. Thank you very much for that. I hope that you all have a bit of capacity still to take in some new things, and I hope I have too. I'll try to tell you this good and important story about these children that caught my heart. My name is Anne Thorup. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and a professor working with prevention and early intervention, mainly focusing on, as Pia said, these children at familial high risk. And within the next 45 minutes, I'm going to say a little bit about the background, although I know you all know this, but it can be nice to just have a brush up. How can parental mental illness actually affect parenting and the children? And then I'll tell you about the Danish High Risk and Resilience Study, the cohort of children that we are currently following. And I'll also try to give a few perspectives on intervention and long-term follow-up plans. I have no conflicts of interest. But as you all know, being a child and adolescent psychiatrist is also about studying and investigating development. And the children's brains develop so fast. And I actually thought this is the theme of most of the talks we've heard, that we try to measure and follow this development, and it goes so fast that we're always a little bit behind. And this graph up here also shows that there are critical periods where the brain development is very dependent on the stimuli, the structure, and the support that comes from the surroundings, which are many things, but parents have a very central role to play here. And first we have the sensory development, then the motor, the language, the conceptualization, and then the higher cognitive skills. All those who have teenagers at home, there's still hope. They keep on developing until we heard age 22, 25, 28. This slide is from the parental training program called PPP, and I took it with me to just remind you of how many areas parental influence is quite pervasive. It's about language and communication, social skills and peer relationships. We had a symposium yesterday where we talked about the perceived social support of parents with mental illness. We found in this study that they expect less of their social network, they have fewer friends, and also that this impacts the children since they don't serve as role models of if you have a problem or if you have some time extra, you call your friends. Because if parents don't have friends, how could the children learn this way of getting support? And also we know that emotion regulation is taught very much by the dialogue with the parents, coping with adversity and life transitions. And when I come to this point in the slide, I always think about the day when I was going to say goodbye to my daughter at her first day at kindergarten. And then the pedagogue said to me, we know the first day of kindergarten, there can be some very severe reactions from the parents, but we are quite used to handling them. And then I thought, okay, it's not going to be me. I'm going to signal to my daughter that we can manage this. And also school achievement, that parents support their children in homework, follow up on how did it go today, and show interest in their school activities. We also know that sustained attention and problem solving are very important prognostic factors for many areas of life. And also the physical health and well-being, parents have big influence. The next slide is also from PPP, and it shows that we should actually not look at individuals. We should look at dyads or relations, because how the parent's mental health is strongly influences the way he or she manages all the parenting tasks. And that again impacts the child development and the child's brain development, and therefore child mental health. And that this relation is in a balance between risk factors, stresses and vulnerability factors, and protective factors and available resources. And therefore also from an intervention perspective, if we could turn up the protective factors, the resources for those families who are more vulnerable, maybe that could in a very simple way be one of the ways that we could protect them better. And just to remind you that mental health problems always or very often bring with them neurocognitive problems. And we use our cognition, our executive functions, our sustained attention and divided attention very much when we care for children. And even sometimes children can be part of a psychotic delusion, and that is where staff and other parents and social network needs to be extra attentive and pay extra attention, because these situations can of course be very dangerous. They're also very rare. So when I teach medical students, I try to tell them that there is the strongest single risk factor for developing mental illnesses in adulthood is having a familial risk of that by having a parent with a mental illness. But then if we want to detangle that a bit, I found these factors to be the most prominent. So of course, the child will inherit genes and early biological factors linked to pregnancy and birth complications, pregnancy complications, etc. And also we know that parents who have a mental illness often have experienced severe adverse life events, and that can influence their parenting. So sometimes they have quite harsh parenting, or they don't have the resources to be the parent they want due to the mental illness. And sometimes they're even away from their child, so that means that as a caregiver they are not stable and predictable, which we know is important for a child. So insecure attachment is at risk. We also know that these children are at a higher risk of becoming young carers, which means that they take over adult responsibilities in the family. And we're not talking about putting your clothes in the washing basket or emptying the dishwasher. No, we're talking about taking father home from the pub, reminding mom to take her pills, or checking that little brother has his lunchbox with him, and maybe also figuring out what should we have for dinner tonight. And these children, as I'm going to show you, are at an increased risk of experiencing childhood trauma. And as a whole, their families live with higher levels of stress, conflicts, and also these children lack knowledge about the mental illness. One family told us that every time the mother had a relapse because of schizophrenia, they just said to the son that she was hospitalized due to influenza. But then when there was an influenza epidemic, and this was before COVID, then the boy said, "Oh, I'm so afraid that I get influenza, because then I know I'll be hospitalized for 6 weeks and I'll have no contact with you here in the family." And of course, this was well meant for the families, but it illustrates how hard it is to start this important conversation. And also, I'm going to show you, these children have their own neurocognitive problems and early signs of psychopathology. And not to forget the surroundings. As I mentioned, poor social network, but also lower socioeconomic status. It goes hand in hand with mental illness. And the stigma and taboo that has also been touched upon in many of the symposium that I have been attended is a part of the familial high-risk concept. So if we should translate this into how can it affect the developing brain, maybe the very simple way is to say that these children are at increased risk of growing up in an environment where stress levels are high, and they may be not even increased, but be what we call toxic stress. That means that for a larger or a longer period, levels of cortisol are high, and they are not balanced down to a more calm level, so they are increased in a chronic way, and that is not good for neurodevelopment. And just to give you a few examples of that, here we have a register study that I did together with Christine Davidsen. We looked at infants up to 6 years, so children from age 0 to 6, with parents diagnosed with either schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or depression. And then we looked at their risks for a series of outcomes. So this is both somatic, like injuries, pediatric diagnosis, regulation difficulties, but also neurodevelopmental disorders and emotional and behavioral disorders. And what you see, if I can find the pointer, These are the children who are only newborn or of the first year of life, and we see a very high increased risk for these 3 parental mental illnesses for the child having emotional and behavioral disorders. But actually for all the outcomes and for all 3 age groups, the risks were increased. Another example was a register study done by my colleague Anne Ranning. And here we wanted to investigate what is the impact if a parent has a suicidal attempt during the child's life, and especially how does it impact age. So here you see the blue line, that's the background population. The turquoise line, that is if the child was 25 years old when the parent had a suicidal attempt. And you can see these 2 lines are more or less the same. But then you also see that the red line, that's the children with the highest risk. That was the children who had the age of 0 to 1 when the parent came to a place in her or his life where committing suicide seemed to be a solution. So this again illustrates the vulnerability of the developing brain, and that also things that happen very early in life that we should assume the infant will not remember or verbalize or understand still impacts the development so much that much later in life these are the individuals with the highest risk of also trying to commit suicide. I hope I explained it understandable. And another register study that I made with my colleagues was that I had the impression that in clinic, in child and adolescent psychiatry, we often see children and we put in familial history, mother has depression, father has bipolar. But I wanted to know if this was true. So we looked into the Danish registers and looked at children born to parents with one of the 3 severe mental illnesses, bipolar, depression, or schizophrenia. Here you see, and it's some years ago, so it's only about 10% of the background population where children up to age 18 were in contact with CARMS. And here you see children with 1 ill parent, and these lines up here, these are children with 2 ill parents. So these children do come to our clinics. But I know we're busy, but I think we sometimes do not use this knowledge that we have, that there are actually illness in 2 generations. Another meta-analysis showed us that if you have a parent with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or depression, you actually have 50% risk of the offspring of having some kind of mental disorder, and 1/3 of them will have one of the 3 severe mental disorders. So you inherit an increased risk of developing your parents' illness, but also the 2 other severe mental illnesses. And our Danish register study just showed us that we have at least 100,000 children in Denmark who has a parent who are treated in the secondary sector. This is the hospital system. And another 200,000 children where parents are treated in the primary sector. And now I'm going to talk about schizophrenia and bipolar disorder as if they were boxes, if they were something that characterizes a person. It's not. So I really want to talk for a more dynamic and flexible understanding of diagnosis. This also means a lot to parents, to see the whole person and not their diagnosis. And this is a figure that illustrates that we should think much more flexible about diagnosis. Because here are the early diagnoses and here are the later diagnosis. And these are registered data from the full Danish population. So you can see that there are all kinds of combinations of that you started with having one diagnosis and later you had another. And I also want to remind you that it's not only schizophrenia and bipolar disorder that increases the children's risk of getting in contact with child and adolescent psychiatry. Here are data from the Finnish birth cohort study showing the parental diagnosis here and then the risks of the children for having a diagnosis before age 22. And as you can see, for all diagnoses, except actually for F50 to 59, where the risk was not significant, we found increased risk among the children as well. So don't think too much about the diagnosis because they change. And now I'm going to tell you about this cohort of Danish children. We managed to recruit 522 children from all over Denmark. They were recruited on the basis of Danish registers, and we had 202 children where with at least one parent being in the registers with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. We had 200 controls, meaning that the parents did not have schizophrenia and not bipolar, but they could have something else. And we had 120 children with a parent with bipolar disorder. Here, if I'm in a smaller audience, I normally get 2 questions. And what are those 2 questions? Why did you include 202? That's a strange number. Actually, it was supposed to be 200. But because we were so flexible and friendly and helpful towards the families, then 2 families said, oh, we only want to participate if the little brother can participate as well. And Mette, who was our lovely nurse to call all these families, she couldn't resist that and said, of course, no problem, you can bring the little brother. When he turned 7, because they were all the same age. And then, of course, we would have loved to have 200 bipolar children, but that was too much. Actually, originally we planned 100, and then we saw that recruitment was going well. The assessors were so bright and so fast, so we managed to make it 120. Because a study like this, it takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. So these children were investigated very thoroughly at the first time when they were 7 years old. Of course, we asked the child, him or herself, how do you feel? Please fill in these questionnaires and do all these tasks. But we also asked the primary caregiver, sometimes the parent with a diagnosis, sometimes the other parent, and we investigated the other parent as well. We sent questionnaires to the school teacher, we made our own observations, and we were blinded to family status of the family, so we didn't know if it was a child with a predisposition or not. And we went to home visits in 516 of the 522 families, which was fantastic. And now a lot of results. Please try to remember the color codes. The green, that's the controls. Here you see that 85% of the children in the control group at age 7 were still living with both their biological parents, while this was only true for 40% of the children with a predisposition for schizophrenia and 53% of those with bipolar predisposition. And 15 and 11% actually lived alone with the ill caregiver. As I said, we made interviews with the children, so we made a KittySats interview with all children, and we found already at age 7 that 1/3 of the 7-year-old children fulfilled or had fulfilled a diagnosis at age 7, which was only true for 15% of the controls. And the most common diagnoses were anxiety, ADHD, and stress and adjustment disorder in both groups. Also, we tried to look at the level of daily functioning, and the children in the 2 high-risk groups actually scored lower than the control group. This is the C-GAS score. It's a scale from 0 to 100, and a difference of 10 is, you can translate that into being able to have regular peer contact, having play dates where you have go to your friend or the friend is going to your home, or attending a leisure time activity. So actually some of these important protective factors that we did not find among the high-risk children. The full test battery took 3 days, and most of the time, or a lot of the time, was the KittySats, but also a lot of cognitive tests. I'm not going into detail with this busy slide, just showing you that in all these 4 domains, especially the children with a predisposition for schizophrenia, the dark purple triangles here, were found to perform significantly poorer than their peers in the 2 other groups. We also asked these children, at age 7, do you sometimes hear things or see things that others cannot hear or see? Do you sometimes smell things? And people have questioned if that is possible. But I think by doing this very thoroughly, we actually videotaped every interview and we turned back to it. We scored it at clinical conferences. And remember, we were blinded. So it may be that there were a little bit of insecurity about the scoring, but it's easy to see here that the purple bars are much higher than the green ones. We do not know how much this means at age 7, that child says, yes, sometimes I hear something, or I thought I saw a monster behind the curtain. But we know that if this persists, it is a risk factor for later development of full-blown psychosis. So we are following up on that. We did that already at the second wave. We also gave them a questionnaire called This Is Me, with quite simple questions that a 7-year-old could easily reply to. And what we found were that the children at predisposition for schizophrenia were less likely to show us high self-esteem or high quality of life compared to the two others. And now to a case story. So it is the 7-year-old girl, Caroline, who answers her mother's phone when we try to call to recruit them to participate in our study. It was in the afternoon, and the mother is asleep, but the girl is trying to wake her up and saying, Mommy, wake up, it might be something to do with your job. And this later told me that this could actually be an indication of being a young carer, that this 7-year-old girl was so attentive to that her mother should answer the phone. But then the mother came to the phone, and yes, they would like to participate. And then we went to visit them. Caroline lives with her mother and her older half-brother, who has his own mental problems and is in a room with a locked door that we never saw open. And they live in a small apartment. The girl's room is hoarded with all her things placed in the middle of the room or on the floor because they need to paint the walls. But this has not been done for at least a year. The kitchen is not clean and it has things all over the place. The mother sleeps on the floor in the living room because the girl is sleeping on the couch. And the girl behaves younger than her age, and she doesn't have any leisure time activities due to the changing and unpredictable working hours of the mother, and that was why she paid so much attention. The girl has specific problems with numbers, as she cannot count to 12, although she took first grade of school 2 times. And in this family, it's actually the father who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The girl sees her father every Wednesday from 2 to 6. That's how much he could offer, or he had energy or possibility to give. He believes that he can feel other people's eyes in the back of his neck where they can interfere with his thoughts. So I don't know if you know this saying that I don't have eyes in my back, but he translated that into that he could feel other people's eyes coming into his head, interfering with his thoughts. So in this case, we wrote a statutory report to the municipalities, and the mother actually was found to also have a moderate depression, so not only the father. So that was the short story of the VIA-7 study. We continued at age 11, where we reinvestigated all the families again. And as you can see, we had a very high retention rate of 89%. So most families wanted to participate again. And it was from March 17 to June 2020. And again, we did neurocognition, psychopathology, social functioning. We visited the homes, and we did parental mental health and socioeconomic status. And we added data on physical health and brain structure by offering the children MR scans. And just a few results from the VIA-11 study. So again, we found that the C-gas was significantly lower for the children in the 2 high-risk groups, based on the Kittysats interview, and also level of psychopathology was higher based on the CBCL. And if we look further at psychopathology, what we found was that the difference that we found at age 7 was exactly the same, but just increased in all 3 groups. So it's not that these were just earlier diagnosed. It seems that the difference is stable over time. And especially we found increased rates of anxiety disorders, and I'm sorry for the color codes, these are the bipolar children. Those of you who know Anne Duffy's research on bipolar offspring will remember that anxiety could be the first warning sign, together with sleep disorders, for that if you have bipolar in the family, you would also be one of those developing bipolar disorder. So this could be a place for intervention. Affective disorder were increased, and also ADHD was more common in the 2 high-risk groups. We are also very interested in investigating trauma and stress in the 3 groups. Here you see data from VIA-7, where an increased or a significant higher amount of families reported stress and traumatic life events. And we did take out the traumatic life event or the stressor having a parent with a mental illness, because of course that would be larger in the 2 groups. So both at VIA via 7, via 11, and the full lifetime, we found increased rates of stress and traumatic life events. And this was also reflected in amount of stress and adjustment disorders that were diagnosed through the KITTI-SATS interview. Again, actually, the bipolar show higher rates than the children with a predisposition for schizophrenia. As I mentioned, we were lucky to go to home visits in so many of these families. We used the home inventory, which is a semi-structured interview, also based on observation. The child has to be awake and be present together with the caregiver, and you interview them both about how do you do normal routines, what did you do yesterday, and you're interested in both structure, stimulation and support, both for the child to be supported but also that the child can be independent and be in good development. And also here we found significant differences at both time points, which left us with an impression that this could also be a good place to start intervening. And it was physical environment, role models, self-confidence creating, and doing things together in the family community that were the most significant affected areas. We were also trained by a physiotherapist to do the movement ABC. This is the data from both via 7 and via 11. The green line is the controls. And especially for the children with a predisposition for schizophrenia, they performed poorer on these 3 subscales of the motor functioning test. We were also interested if these children were more bullied. They told us so at age 7, so we constructed a virtual reality environment and tested that on the 3 groups, but there we saw no differences. The children with the predisposition for schizophrenia were not more likely to interpret a little situation as more bullying. But when we looked at the data from themselves, from the parents and from the teachers, we again saw that it seems like bullying is an independent risk factor for these children with genetic risk as well. As I said, in via 11, we also wanted to investigate physical health, and we did that by implementing a sense chip on their thigh, which they had to wear for 1 week, so it would measure their level of physical activity. And here you see a significant difference between, again, the 2 high-risk groups and the controls in number of hours with high-intensity physical activity. And also number of steps taken per day was lower in the 2 high-risk groups, and also moderate physical intensity. And when we asked them if they were attending leisure time activities, there were also higher rates among the control group. So again, here we could say, maybe you have parents who don't have so much energy because they're medicated or they have negative symptoms. You have children with motor impairments. And then we also see that they are less active and less likely to also attend leisure time activities that could support this function. We also have seen Caroline in via 11. She has moved to foster care where she's been living for a year. She does not like the place and she does not trust anybody. She goes to a special school in a class with only 5 other pupils. Her cognitive abilities are not age appropriate, and she had a hard time in school before she was moved away from home. She has no friends, except for the girl with the long white hair that she sees and talks to every day, although nobody else can see her. Caroline is afraid of being spied upon, and she says that she has installed a small camera in her room. At night, she hears music and steps and whispers. Her mother is trying to support her as much as she can, while her father is very ill, hospitalized at the time of follow-up. So this time we made a referral to child and adolescent psychiatry for Caroline because nobody had talked to her about these emerging psychotic symptoms. Right now, we're in the last phase of the via 15, the 3rd wave of the cohort study. This time we have a polysomnographic, which means that the children are offered to sleep with electrodes on their head for 1 night. We do 5-minute speech sample about the adolescent is talking about the parent. We are assessing risk behavior and self-harm. And we're also doing focus groups. So we're asking these young people, what's the likelihood that you want to stay in this cohort? Next time we're going to ask you, it will be via 19. How are we going to contact you? And they said, don't send us letters, digital mail, that's so boring. Send me a text in TikTok or Snapchat or whatever. One girl said, it means so much to be part of this study. I think it's going to be a much harder decision to say no than to say yes. So that was very nice. We sent them Christmas cards and birthday cards, and we cannot, although we're trying to be just an observational study, of course, if we see emergent acute problems, we refer them to mental health services, or we write letters to the municipality or to social services. So this is the plan. We just got the very good news that we have the VIA 19 funded, so that is going to start when VIA 15 ends. We tried to see Caroline in VIA 15, and there were also appointments, but every time she cancelled just a few hours before, saying that she felt too bad. And she's still living in foster care. That's what we know. Okay, so having seen all this, I got the feeling that we were sitting on our hands, just waiting to see who will eventually turn ill of these young people. But actually, they showed us a lot of problems already at age 7, again at age 11, and I can tell you also at age 15. So we started to consider, well, what can we do? And what I also found out was that mental illness affects the whole family. Those of you who know me will know that I'm not the tattoo kind of person, but if I should ever have a tattoo, this would be the text. Mental illness affects the whole family. Because we have seen parents with mental illness who have symptoms and side effects, who are self-stigmatizing, feel so bad that it's their own fault. They have low self-confidence as a parent, they are often stressed, have poor sleep, and are poorly affiliated to job market. And we know that the other parent, often there is assortative mating. The other parent can worry, feel sad, lack knowledge about the mental illness, feel stressed, feeling overburdened or over-responsible at the times when the mental illness is active, and is often away from work too. And as I showed you, numerous problems with the young children and also with the adolescents, symptoms of anxiety, depression, and also problems of building independency. Having the right to build your own life and leave your parents at home is for sure a problem. And then for the whole family, unclear roles, conflicts and stress at a high level, lack of routines, traditions, things that could keep them together, poor socioeconomic status, an unhealthy lifestyle, isolation, and poor social network. I didn't show you results that documents this, but we had a questionnaire called Caregivers Helplessness Questionnaire, where we could document that more caregivers in the high-risk families have this feeling of helplessness towards their children, and also that their social network, their expectations for their social networks are lower. I was not the first one to think about that we should do something. Actually, there are 3 brilliant reviews already that have looked into what can we do for these families. So the only problem is that we don't know what to do, and many things have been tried out, and it's not yet crystal clear what will be the best thing to do. Because family-based and systemic things have been tried out, something for the mother only, group-based, at clinic or in the homes, psychoeducation, CBT, psychotherapy, parental training. The good news is that although it's rather small effect sizes, it seems like there is something to go for, although follow-up is often very short. So, since I was brought up in the Opus project where I wrote my PhD, I was very inspired by this idea of a multidisciplinary team. And since these families are so heterogeneous and present so complex and different problems, I thought that the solution should also be flexible and, in a way, if you could say, complex too. So we put together resources from child and adolescent psychiatry, from adult psychiatry, and from the primary sector, like the social services, in a multidisciplinary team that we called the VIA Family Team. And the idea was that for 18 months, the families would be referred to this team with a case manager. So this one person would be very central. The family could contact the case manager with any kind of issue or problem. And then they would be offered a tailor-made psychoeducation for all family members, 6 to 8 meetings, inviting the family to talk about the mental illness. And then the children would be offered groups to meet other children, while the parents would meet in a parents' cafe at the same time. Also, we would be offering parental training from the Triple P program, but always according to the parents' needs, the problems that they formulated themselves, and their motivation. And if the children were showing any kind of early symptoms, we would be able to make an assessment and a faster referral if needed. Further elements that were offered, but were not, that were just an obligation, was to map the resources in the social network. Many families needed a plan. What if daddy gets suicidal thoughts Saturday evening? Mom needs to take him to the emergency room. Who will then help look after the family? So a safety plan. Many families did not dare to call the municipality, so there may be resources just around the corner, but they'd be so afraid to call somebody because then maybe the child would be removed from their home. At least that was what they imagined. And also for some parents, just to optimizing the treatment of the mental illness was helpful. So we managed to recruit 95 families that were randomized to either standard care, which is very random and not very much in the capital region of Denmark, or this intervention that I just described for you. And I'll just go very briefly over the first results. This is what we call a pilot study. The client satisfaction scale showed that there was a significantly higher satisfaction with this multidisciplinary team and the case management. We saw a tendency towards improvement of the home environment via family groups compared to TAU, but to treatment as usual. But there were no difference when we looked at daily functioning of the children or of the parents. Daily functioning of the child was the primary outcome, so of course I was very disappointed the day we revealed that result, and also no differences in child psychopathology. We also collected some qualitative data, and I just brought a few citations here. It's the first time that we've sat down together as a family and talked about the mental illness. It gave us a common language and more equality in the family. That's a father who said that. I have more faith in myself as a parent. I do not feel so lonely in the parenting role, and therefore I found hope for the future. I wish I could stay in contact with the case managers, just all these small things, when I know it would be helpful for me just to talk to her. And one child said, I liked to eat with the other children's parents and to see that they looked quite normal, meaning that then my father also looks normal to them. So the message to take home is parental mental illness can seriously impact family life. Children at familiar risk for severe mental illness actually show us many signs of vulnerability already at age 7 and again at age 11. Early interventions are being developed. Family-based psychoeducation and children's groups could be low-hanging fruits that may benefit many families. And if we want to promote resilience, which could be to protect these vulnerable children, then at the individual level is to support emotional regulation in the children and executive functioning. And especially, and we saw Ruth Feldman demonstrating this so clearly, stable, caregiving, sensitive and supportive relationship to adults in the family, but also schools supporting social relation and mastery of the pupils, and society to offer cultural activities in the community, traditions and places where you meet peers are very important for good mental health. So what is resilience? An outcome, a process, or a capacity? So successful adaptation to threatening disturbances or acute stress or chronic adversities, ability to avoid severe or delirious behavioral or physiological changes in response to chronic stress, to come back to good functioning, a process to harness resources to sustain well-being, and the capacity to resume functioning following adversity. And we know that these families have more adversities than many others. So I've come to the end. These are all my collaborators. I want to thank all of them for their wonderful participation and for their collaboration during many years. And I want to thank you for your attention.